But doesn't do one. Today was I will focus on I have for you. I will come to it.
Hi. Hi. I haven't seen you miaka na miaka.
Already,
No, so far.
next need to put the next thing. Put it off.
Hello. I'll get some done so that we can discuss the next session. Hello. Hello. Sitting down. Yes, sitting down. Let's take a break. Hello, Bozi. So, we're going to be starting the next session, which is really focusing on the media knowledge of distribution. As we've heard from the previous panel, we have a lot of talents, a lot of important knowledge. We work with us and so on across different countries. Study highlighted these challenges. So this session, this record is see ways of future development. So we have analysts to help us try to find these solutions. But also we have a lot of groups here. So it's contribute to important of Africa's continuing and to help us digest this interesting topic. I'd like to invite three panelists, Dana from Bwire, from Media Council, and Oluka from Global Distribution. Please do clap for them. Keep clapping until the guest is good. Marco free. Guys. This like so thank you very much for everything and very good time for information. I'd like to just give you just 1 minute first. Okay? 1 minute to introduce yourself and what you're doing. This one yeah, lots of things. Yeah, must be clear.
Media regulator. So largely the issue of training, certification of journalists, development of short curriculum, media monitoring, and the rest, and obviously policy related issues, advising government, policy implementation,
Thank you. My name is Diana San. I'm the Africa Director at the Digital Impact Alliance, which is an NGO that supports work largely with governments, but then also with other ecosystem players to make sure that as we design technology, and in this case, DPI, we make sure that it's really designed in ways that really put people better. It's great to meet folks from different countries here. We doing a lot of work in Ethiopia, we've done some work in Uganda, we are currently active in Peru and Romania. Just some of those reflections, how we can have of details.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Benon from Oluka. I work with the Global Network as the Africa editor, and our work is like don't do the investigations themselves. We help those investigations do the different ways. I also have someone here with say sets of shoes. The other one is I have a passion project called Menterprise Africa, and the idea is trying to encourage for innovation, enterprises, is where the connection between what I do, passion, and if you, the organization that we talk about is called Menterprise Africa. Menterprise Africa. This statistics. All have my yes, we are spoken about some general. Aspects that we need to prioritize in order to strengthen media coverage. Yeah, I think the easy answer to this question would be build the capacity of journalists, train them to do more reporting on digital public infrastructure. Also, do some media literacy work so that the public gets to know more about what digital public infrastructure is and why they should care. So that would be the easy way to talk about it and say that that's how to improve coverage of digital transformation issues. But training alone does not solve the whole challenge. It's just a starting point. So the work that CIPESA is doing with Co-Develop to set up this fellowship, to make sure that there is a footprint of journalists who are doing this kind of reporting on digital transformation issues across the East African region is a starting point. But there are other things we can do. And one of them is to ensure that journalists generally align their reporting with the national, continental, and global benchmarks on digital transformation. So you have if you started even at the political party level, every political party has promises they make that when we get to power, this is what we intend to do. Uganda has an election. Kenya will soon have an election. So if you somebody covering elections, you should be thinking, what are these parties, political parties, promising to do? Tanzania has an election, and South Sudan has always promised to have an election, but 12 years down the road, we're still waiting. Yeah, but seriously, so parties will talk about in their manifestos what they promise to do for, among other things, the digital transformation in their countries and the public infrastructure that they have developed. We should begin from there to say those benchmarks, do they align, for instance, with the UN benchmarks for how society should use, what kind of digital infrastructure society should. When we are covering, for instance, the police, we normally say there's a policeman for there should be a policeman for every, is it 500 people? If we're covering the health sector, we say there should be a doctor for every so number of patients. And if we are covering education, we say there should be a teacher for this number of pupils, or there should be per class, there should be about 40 pupils per class. That is the benchmark. Now, are we covering DPIs or digital transformation in the same way? If somebody is developing a national ambulance service, what is the minimum time within which they should have should have access to an ambulance if they get an emergency? So if there's a system that has been developed and it says it serves people, how soon should somebody have access to an ambulance? I think in the UK they are trying to go down to below 5 minutes. Rwanda, the last I saw, was looking at 30 minutes. So there are those benchmarks where you can say, what is the state of our country's, digital infrastructure? What can it provide within a certain time frame, and what is the international benchmark? So that's one thing. Two, the African Union has what is called a digital transformation strategy for Africa, 2020-2030, and they deal with things like digital health, education, agriculture, governance. I think reporters should be able to acquaint themselves with such documents so that they're able to benchmark their reporting of what is happening in their respective countries on what has been agreed at continental level, at the global level, and then, I think that anchoring your reporting on such benchmarks will help people to have something to refer to when they are doing their reporting. When they are reading your story and when they are holding government to account. Two, the issue of covering local innovations and tech enterprises in our countries. Most times, many innovators go ahead of their governments. And I think that's why they're called innovators. They develop new things that even their governments are not thinking about. So, and those things they develop will eventually end up serving society and making life easier. A very big example, the easiest to refer to is mobile money. How CIPESA innovated, and then the government had to catch up with its, the regulations and all that, the legal framework. So we should be looking out for such innovations. What's happening in telemedicine? What's happening in provision of education digitally? What's happening in agribusiness or entrepreneurship? If we do that, then we are able to bring to that, to shine the spotlight on innovations that people should stand up and take notice. The other one is looking at infrastructure gaps. So there will be, when this infrastructure is being developed, the digital infrastructure, there will be certain gaps. There will be social inclusion, exclusion. There will be issues to do with, are we able to provide services for everyone? If you're pegging payments to maybe taxes, if you're pegging payments to government services, to CIPESA or Visa cards, have you developed the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that is able to serve everybody, or are you excluding certain parts of society from accessing the services? So I think if you want to strengthen that coverage, we should be looking at such things, ask the questions that should be able to get those in public spaces uncomfortable, get them to think through some of the difficulties that people are facing, and then they can devise solutions. So those, for me, would be the three things that we should be looking at in the bid to strengthen media coverage of the digital transformation in East Africa and the other continents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting one. So I'll turn to you, Diana. Same question. What do you think? Where should we start in terms of strengthening?
Thank you. I think for me, I feel like sometimes we focus too much on the technology and not the impact or the value. And I feel like we should shift our perspective and the focus to really understand the human side of DPI. And I feel that is where the media and journalists are really well placed, because it's to bring in the human perspective through stories, and to help meet the gap between the public servants, the technologists, and the citizens. DPI is complex, but I still feel like it's not more complex than any other topics, not even more complex than CIPESA, for example. But I think because the story has been shaped and led by the technologists, I think that's where the problem comes. For instance, if we look at M-Pesa, which is a commonly known example, you won't find a lot of stories and talking about M-Pesa is made up of 3 layers. There is the wallet, and then there is the USSD interface. There's an API that does this, but everybody understands M-Pesa. It's a way to transfer money from where you are. You don't need to travel. It's cheap. It's in your. And I think sometimes for the population, that's what they need to understand. They don't need to understand how an API works. There are technologists who can focus on that, the same way you have medical journalists. I don't know if they are technology journalists, but there are those small spaces where you can have people who are really looking into the technology and the science behind it. But I think for the masses, one mistake I feel that we made in the ecosystem, those who are really driving DPI, is too much focus on the tech and not on the people. Technology is a means to an end. DPI is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Once you've registered 20 million people on Maisha number, that is not success. Success is what have they been able to do now that I have Maisha number. Now that I have, I'm on this national payments platform. And if that is not clear and citizens don't understand that, then it's so hard to start to explain that, there's a digital data exchange layer, and this, how do you bring that to the rural communities? How do you explain that to the wider population, those who are digitally not literate? And within the journalism space, I have not interacted with journalists much, but I can imagine new things are coming up for you every now and then. Tomorrow something comes up, and you kind of have to be an expert in that quickly to know how to ask the right questions, to know how to, now it's DPI. Slowly AI is becoming the next thing. Next year, I think we'll be here and we will not be talking about DPI, it's now AI. Will you then quickly become AI experts? And then after that, become, so I think there's a balance to see what is the media fraternity and what a journalist is best placed to do. You are best placed to tell the stories, to humanize these technologies, to demonstrate the value. Still sticking with M-Pesa as an example, I remember during, for the Kenyans in the room, when we started with Huduma number, there was a time we were even being threatened to go and, get your Huduma card. There was a day, I think there was a time they put a holiday. If you don't get registered, you will not do this, you will not do this. We were being threatened. Have you seen people being threatened to go and register for a SIM card? And they are paying for the SIM card. They're not paying for this because they understand the value of the SIM card. They don't know how it works. They don't know the layers and the technologies, how many but they know I can send money to my grandmother in Kericho instantly. I can pay school fees for my child. Right now, I don't need to go to the school. So how can we humanize those stories around DPI so that people can really understand what this whole DPI is? From my perspective, I don't think they need to understand how data exchange links with payments and they will over time. Over the 10 years plus of M-Pesa's existence, we've come to know some things about the terminal, but even me, I can't explain to you how the API links, I do not know. But here I am talking about digital transformation. So I think that's what we should do. We should focus more on what value is DPI bringing, because on this other side, I think that's a challenge that technologists face. They keep iterating, keep changing, but they're not really seeing what's the impact on the person. No, let's change this, let's tweak this, let's add this, so I think bringing that people to the center and really making the conversation about people, because technology is a means to an end and not an end in itself.
Interesting, bringing people, humanizing, very, very interesting approach. And I think previously we had talked about the event-based reporting, not time to humanize, just want to connect it's like monopoly. When you pass go, you collect. So the journalists want to send the story and collect, not time for humanist approach, but very, very valid points there.
Victor, what do you think? How do we start strengthening media coverage of digital transformation from what you see?
Thank you. One, I worked in a newsroom, and several newsrooms, and sometimes the thinking is that we put too much pressure on journalists, that sometimes it's easier to talk than to implement. Because averagely, newsrooms are losing about 100 journalists every year, and it's across. So that these desks we are talking about, how many journalists do we have? That then would help us in having those specialist desks and specialized. So as we engage, we need also to appreciate that the newsroom has changed. That media is no longer the newsroom. That media is now in people's hands, in people's blogs and the rest. So that in these discussions, if we look at it that way, then we start appreciating. Because when the study was being released, the data, you see, why is Kenya, for example, had a number of stories? You will notice Nation has a dedicated 4 pages on health, technology, and the rest every Tuesday. Standard has a dedicated desk for technology and those. So obviously that has given it a bigger space because of those dedicated desks. The other thing that we notice also, because at the media council where I work, we have a curriculum actually. When we are talking about, we developed a curriculum for technology and DPI reporting with, I think it's Moi University, which we have been training journalists on reported. During the annual Journalists of the Year award, where we award journalists in excellence, there's a whole category of technology. And the Huawei's and the other people who work with technology pick up some of these journalists, whatever. And they are doing very well, surprisingly. It might not be too many journalists, but their names, the endangered here, Martin, remember Franklin Sunday. We can name those guys who have really come out in technology, and they do 2 pages, 3 pages stories. Why? Because there's also to give incentives to these guys. Remember, our journalism training, the dog has changed. That unlike some of us who are doing journalism at a postgraduate level, in Kenya, journalism starts as a certificate and people learn the same thing, so that they have good, the nuts of both are journalism, but where's the content at the other things? So our universities and colleges must also start in that you cannot teach somebody from certificate, diploma, master's, PhD, the same news values. What will he do? They never change. So this guy, once he has been introduced the news values and basics of journalism in his certificate or diploma, as he goes up, we need to diversify the training of journalists at a higher level, to start introducing specialized courses, so that then we have people who can write, but write on what. So that has also been missing. That some of these things, if you went to any university in this country, there's no university that teaches journalism or tech and the rest things we are talking here. So how do we then expect those journalists to know them and even get the interest? So that gap needs to be looked at. So as a council, we notice that gap is huge, because when we introduced the category on digital and infrastructure technology, the first 2 years, we got some very good story entries. The next 3 years, we never even got. They were all dismissed by the judges. There was no quality story. So we had to go back and say, what we rush the award or what we? And they say, before we rush there, yes, we think that's how we thought about a curriculum, training of journalists in that area. Then we came out with the issue of grants. We give short grants to journalists. Not at this level of a fellowship, but a grant to journalists to then work with mentors in the technology and infrastructure sector to work with them. That then gives us more voices in that area and the rest. So that has the grants, the training has helped us, but the incentives has also helped, because teaming up also journalists with these experts helps. And you notice why government alone? Notice that the digital infrastructure we're talking about is a very heavy investment sector. It's a huge amount of money. Huduma numbers, the e-citizens are not easy money. And what happens? There's no lack of access. So we notice that the level of corruption in some of those investments is so huge that journalists cannot ignore. So you read the auditor report, you read the parliamentary investment committees, it's always scandals about those big projects. So sometimes they tie down journalists also, that the level of the money we are talking about, fiber optic, how much money do we use? Sharp, how much money? You know, and you can e-government, how much money is involved? The computer for schools program fights among government institutions or who will lead, what's the budget involved. This cannot be ignored, even if journalists wanted to talk about the impact. So sometimes, remember also our media, even if you look at the newspaper, the printing you looked at, is purely town-based. That almost all our media newspaper print is Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and Nairobi. Now, the impact we are talking about sometimes might not be in Nairobi. So then who covers Turkana, Soroti, Karamoja? So there might be stories there. But if journalists cannot access some of those areas, then again, you might think nothing is happening. So those are challenges that I was writing a speech the other day for somebody, and we were looking at this technology in agriculture, tech agriculture. And you notice Kenya is leading in terms of registration, the numbers. But these are briefcase startups that start, somebody gets money and disappears. So that even if you wanted to talk about the good things it's doing in health and what, you end up being forced to write a corruption story that thing. Because now the guy disappeared in the tech even. So again, we must also appreciate the circumstances the journalists are working in. They would really want to write about those positive things. But where are they? If you are following this impact on health of drones and what, then the first thing is this guy was given $10,000 and disappeared. Do you ignore it and continue the impact? So again, those are also issues. Then the other thing is engagement. That these meetings we do and engage at our level, we are very literate, the civil society, but how many other people are literate about some of these things? That at what level do we engage with these journalists? Because I see, like in elections, for example, a lot of the supporters of the National Development Institute, for the foundations, open, they spend so much money on media and elections, on media and other things, in terms of engagements, but how much do we, the tech and the infrastructure investment is spent on media, for example, in terms of engagement, not bribing them, but engagement. Because remember, if I've done journalism, I never heard about DPI up to my age. If you don't help me understand the digital literacy you are talking about and media literacy, then I will remember it. So those are also things that we must also, as we talk about some of this, because of us, because the ministry where the institution I work for falls there exactly, Ministry of Information, ICT, and Digital Highway, it has a very long name. So and I see even the fights within the institution. There is Communication Authority of Kenya, there's ICTA, there's Conga City, there is board, they are all on this thing, and the amounts they are mentioning. But if you ask them, then how much money in this is meant for media engagement, for media sensitization to understand all these fiber things you are doing? They tell you, those journalists will come for a breakfast meeting. So you call somebody for a breakfast meeting, likely 3 hours, in a room like this. The man has not eaten for 2 days, so when he comes, he concentrates on the food. But the 3 hours you want to spend to pump a lot of so much information on technology. The man lives and already taken care with. But there's a trend of these breakfast meetings. So you come to discuss a whole fiber optic national strategy for a country, but you want a journalist for 1 hour and he must take that and go and write a big story. You know, you are expecting miracles, and miracles where they happen now. So we must also invest in some of these discussions. That before, look at people like, for example, working in HIV, elections, the amount of media engagements are too many. But look at our infrastructure in the DPI and how many people engage. So I think we need also to look that there's so much demand, but also the supply. Where is the information coming from? And I have worked with TI to transfer it. I was a mentor on a project that was just mentoring journalists on writing about this topic. And we saw a number of stories coming out. I can tell you a lot of journalists are eager to get specialized topics. They are eager to write about some of these things. But if we don't give them an opportunity, what will they write about? It becomes the national digital the national infrastructure strategy for Kenya is 800 pages. So you give a journalist 800 pages to read. FM station needs 50 words. If the journalists are not get someone to help them read the 800 words and get the 50 words for FM, even in a newspaper, the maximum we can write is 1,000 words. That's a full page you have been given, which is rarely given. But you give me a document of 800 pages. Somebody who has not been paid for 3 months is chasing deals here and there. He has 800. The editor is, and he's the sports writer, he's the technology writer, he's the political writer, the same guy. Something will die somewhere. So we need also to be fair to journalists that if we don't give them the support, look at the amount of money on climate change, for example, that is going to journalists. There's a lot. People invest, and we are seeing those stories. So I believe that if we engage well with this fellowship approach, grants approach, training approach, it would help a lot. And more than lamenting and expecting, even my friend who did political science and just master's, to now write about fiber optic. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting aspect that we actually need to invest in journalist training and that kind of capacity building to help bring out the stories, given the existing challenges that journalists already have. I'd like to turn to Benon. You had, what Victor was saying, that some of these big projects end up also being corruption money pits and so on. A lot of public funds are also being lost. What can we do to also strengthen the investigative reporting, especially on these big projects who you find in many countries, the project documents are not made public, the tender documents are not made public, but a lot of money is spent. I know Kenya, for example, 104 billion on the social health insurance, ICT infrastructure, and it's still not working today. So, but the stories we see are not talking about, going deeper. So, what can we do to bring out these issues?
It feels like Victor answered that question in a roundabout way, even without you asking. So I think what I'm doing now is to really buttress what he said. When people become doctors, they start out as general doctors. Eventually, they specialize in something which, they'll find an area of specialization maybe they're passionate about. You'll find orthopedic doctors or even orthopedic surgeons. So even surgeons have a level of specialization. So you'll have orthopedic surgeons, you'll have people focus on the heart, the lungs. I met somebody who told me his PhD was just focusing on this part of the arm from here up to here. And that's his level of specialization. So when I fractured my arm while out in the field at some point, I was lucky at a different point when I needed a review to meet a professor who told me, this is my level, this is my specialization. So that's the level of specialization in the medical field. Lawyers go into commercial law and all those kinds of things. I've heard now there's construction law and that. But the challenge with journalists, as everybody is going deeper into specialization, we are asking people to be generalist journalists, much more than ever before. We're asking somebody to do a news story. We're asking somebody to do videos. We're asking somebody to be able to design graphics. We are asking somebody to be able to edit. We are asking, yet you can't have a jack of all trades. You can't have what I'm calling a generalist journalist in every newsroom. So we need to focus on building capacity in I would think 3 ways. 1, building the editorial capacity. 2, supporting initiatives that try to focus on particular bits. So some of the most interesting investigations that are happening right now are by organizations that focus on bits. There's an organization called InfoNile in Uganda, which focuses on investigating issues of the River Nile basin. And they have been able to find out that I think 70% of the River Nile Basin is owned by foreigners, not Africans. They did a comprehensive investigation of about 3 years who owns the Nile, and found 70% of it is the land on the shores of the Nile have been bought by all sorts of, There is Oxpeckers in South Africa, which focuses on environmental investigations, and that is all they do. There is something called a private security network. It just does investigations on private security. And those are the guys who have been able to bust some of the biggest crimes by private companies, the siphoning of money, money laundering that's happening. So we need a lot more of that. And it should be done even with the digital public infrastructure, that you should be able to have one journalist who specialize in this bit, two media organizations that become niche products, so that if somebody wants to find information on DPIs, there should be 2 or 3 or 4 organizations that they know they can go to. There should be journalists who make a name as the go-to journalists in these areas. And then, of course, the third one is incentives. There should be incentives for people to keep doing this kind of work. It could be fellowships, it could be awards, it could be grants, which enable you. Stories are very expensive. I sometimes see that a lawyer to put together a one-page document is paid, $500,000. A journalist who will do a story of 15 pages is paid $1,000 is too much. Yeah? They'll be paid $100 in many newsrooms. Yeah? So, but a lawyer will just put together, and yet both forms of writing have taken skill. The journalist has probably taken more skill, has used more skills to put together that story than the lawyer who put together a one-page document. But they're paid more. So why is journalism underrated when it requires similar skill or even more skills to do work? So we need to, think about such things. The other thing is equipping journalists with the skills that are needed. We're talking digital transformation, digital public infrastructure, then equip journalists with digital skills. There's so much information we can now get from open source investigations. Yesterday in one of the sessions, we were sharing a toolkit which has possibly 1,000 and more digital tools that can help journalists do investigations, really complex investigations. How many journalists know that these tools are there and that they can facilitate the investigations? That is the other thing. Then most investigations come when you frame stories as governance issues, as political issues, as economic issues. If you just look at it as, digital technology, you're unlikely to find stories in there. But if you frame them as political, economic, and social governance, you then begin to get stories, and that means you also center your reporting on what affects the ordinary person, because this is supposed to be a service that should benefit ordinary people. So if it's not benefiting them, then you should be able to frame it in the ways that people can make it easier for people to interpret what they were supposed to benefit from this service and how they are not benefiting. So where are the loopholes, where are the challenges, who is gaining and losing, where is the money going, because many of these things are huge contracts. So, and what's the relation between the person giving the money out and the person receiving the money? those intricate things are what we should be training people to look out for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also very useful that you mentioned the issue of specialization. I know a couple of journalists like Kevin in Kenya, guys like Larry Monroe, who specialize in business reporters, have gone all the way to CNN. Now I see, I think Julian's on local also specializing in business news. And I think the others have done sports and they've kept at it. And so that specialization is useful, but you don't have those ones that are specialized in tech and technology news reporters. So I think it's also an area that could be captured. I'll be opening it up for questions shortly. Before that, Diana, maybe you can tell us, you guys are doing a lot of work, and you also know about civil society work. What are those, what is the work that you're doing that you think needs more coverage by media? And what work also by other civil societies need to be covered in the areas that you work on?
I think one of the gaps that we've seen in the DPI world that definitely needs more coverage is issues around the governance of DPI. Issues around people's rights when it comes to DPI. Issues around inclusion when it comes to DPI. I think an example could be one statistic that surprised me when you were showing the presentation earlier was a lot of the conversation is one being largely driven by public servants, governments, and two, that a lot of the conversation is on the functional aspects of DPI. We work a lot with governments. And with all respect to our governments, with all due respect to our governments, they are not the most savvy on DPI. One reason, one of the causes is, I think what Robert said earlier around how DPI has been, how the narrative around DPI has been shaped and how it picked up in Africa. DPI really came into, I think it became popular and more aware through it was heavily championed by the government of India, where, they've tried it, they've rolled it out, it works, and it works well, and they decided that this is going to be we're going to take this to the rest of the world. And I think there are a few things that really made I think how the DPI conversation started in Africa, I feel we missed a few steps because one, this is India. Yes, India is huge, but India is one country. But you're trying to compare India and Africa. Africa is a continent. We are so different. There was a project I was doing in Djibouti. I don't know if there's anybody here from Djibouti. And when I went to Djibouti, honestly, if I had gone to Switzerland, there could be no difference. Structures are different, governance is different, language is different. We look the same, but it was so different. Maybe I would have even kind of settled faster if I was relocating to Netherlands than Djibouti, because it was so different. Because things are very different. Yes, we have the African culture that unites us, but if you look at how things happen, how governance happen, how the institutions are set up, it's very different. Anglophone and Francophone Africa, I think there was somebody from DRC here. It's very different. So even for us, Africa, I think some of the challenges we're having in Africa around even just integration as a continent and having a common voice as a continent is because we are so different. And of course, our diversity, I think, is also the strength for Africa. But I think that nuance needs to be put in place when you now picture, like, this is one country, India, that wants now to roll out this thing that they have done and understood themselves across all of Africa. So I think some perspectives were missing. And then looking also what I admired about how India did it, because we've been together with Co-Develop and others, we've kind of been in the conversation since it started. When India was hosting the G20 presidency, before South Africa is hosting it now, before it was India. they now really took charge, and then that was their time to really put India's DPI approach on the map. And that is how they scaled and drove the DPI conversations. So I think for us, and now South Africa thankfully is doing it, DPI is starting to have an African perspective. But I think we need to remember that Africa, as united as we are, we're also very different. It's a paradox. So in our respective countries, what are those unique aspects that are unique to those countries that needs to be put in place when you're talking about DPI? In a country like Chad, maybe, where there's less than, not very sure it's less than 10% or less than 20% internet penetration and connectivity. What should the conversations around DPI there be? Because you could be talking about data sharing and data access and data exchange, but there's no digitized data because there's no connectivity, so the story in Chad will be different from the story of DPI adoption in Kenya. So I think, and I agree with my colleagues here that I think there's a lot of, there are a lot of areas that we expect journalists to have a good grasp very quickly, to even know, because with the Chad example, they need to understand the relation between connectivity and DPI so that they can also ask the right questions. In a place where now there's an evolution, people are talking about how do we integrate DPI and AI. So I think stories around the governance of those, coming back now to the gaps I see, is yes, the technology is important, but governance is really important. How are these systems and platforms governed? Who is in charge of, let's say, data exchange? Which is the entity that is leading it? If you have a question as a journalist and you want to ask, okay, I want to ask about data exchange, who do you go to? So I think really understanding that ecosystem around DPI, understanding the governance aspects, things like accountability and redress mechanisms. Right now, if I send M-Pesa to a wrong number, I know what I can do as a citizen. I have a right. There's even a way I can click a code and it will be reversed. If not, I call this number and I'll get my refund. There are steps I know so I feel empowered and I feel I'm in control of this technology that is in my hand. If somebody appears and they have you see maybe you have duplicate Huduma numbers, or maybe you log in one day to your eCitizen and you find that you're seeing some, like, where do you go? So I think there's a gap there around redress and accountability and people understanding their rights that I feel could be, I think there could be more focus there. Because it is these accountability mechanisms that lead to some of the corruption that we are hearing, because there's just lack of accountability on this amount of money was invested on an ID platform. Who should you ask? Who's accountable for the purchase of the system? Who's accountable for the deployment? Who's accountable for if a citizen's data is missed, who's accountable for that? So who should you ask? So I think the stories around that side of the ecosystem is lacking. So the people, the governance, and then the last one is around, somebody mentioned private sector today. DPI has largely been focused just on, the conversation has largely been with governments. But we know that private sector is really driving the economy. If private sector did not latch on and use and really integrate with M-Pesa, for example, I don't think it would be as successful as it is right now, but they're not in the room. So I think also bringing in those voices, including bringing journalists into the conversation, bringing private sector into the conversation, bringing community-based organizations into the conversation. I think, as you said, like somewhere in a remote area, what do they understand about DPI? How do we know about, when you're registering like for digital identities, I think Namati has done a lot in some of the work they did in the Nubian community, so you understand what it looks like, because there are several layers of exclusion that are there, that if you do not work with people who really understand that ecosystem, then there's a lot we're missing out. So I think there are those other areas around, the technology is important, but these other areas around the governance, the ecosystem there. Who is using DPI? It's not just government. Private sector should be building on DPI. Where are they? I think those are areas I've seen where it would be good to have more amplify and get conversations around.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very elaborate perspectives. I think even when we had the mention number, if you read the newspapers, nobody spoke about who the contractor is who is supplying the system. You just see people wake up one day and their devices where people are putting their fingers and taking their photos being taken, but the private sector behind that and how much they were even paid. And to imagine that after all that collection of data of 37 million phones, they got through that, the government cannot even use it. So that loss is also quite significant. I'd like to open the floor for questions or comments. Maybe if I can see a show of hands. Right. So we can take 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we conclude because this is what is between us and lunch. So yes, just say your name and organization and also the question. And
thank you very much, Peter Okello, Bwire from Uganda. I'm Secretary General of the East Africa Press Councils. I just want to give a comment or two. First of all, in terms of the people that we should be targeting, in addition to the people you have put in the room, the people that you're training, I think we need to involve the media or the owners also. I don't know whether there's a plan for that, because these are the people who determine eventually what will go into their spaces. I think I recently saw in Kenya here after a meeting nearby here, one owner of the media house wrote and they directed the media house on how they should cover. And that happens across all of us in Uganda. I think it would be good to, and the editors, senior editors, because they should also understand these things. Because as it is, DPI sounds abstract. So if you first come across it, you may think you're talking about North Korea. If you just continue with DP, you find case somewhere. Then I also agree with Oluka there about the framing of these issues. This is digital tech issues by their nature. It tend to be boring and hard, first of all, to a journalist. So how we frame it, I think, to make people have interest and would be, for example, what Mr. Oluka was saying there about, how about you take it from the angle of the people, the consumers of the news? What are the challenges they are dealing with in the tech space, in the digital space? Coming from Uganda, for example, I think my sister there talked about mobile money. People have issues with transactions there, they are cheated, they lose money and so on. If you did a very good expose story around there and how these things play out, I think they'll pick interest. And even the editors and so on will give space for that kind of thing. These telecos typically cheat in terms of minutes. If you invested time and resources in investigating that kind of thing and exposing it, and people will be interested in electricity, the billing, and so on, and touch from the viewpoint of the people themselves. Then from the government side, the people that carry people's data, the digital, the IDs, the driving permits, data protection, and all the issues around there. If you took it up from there, I think it would be very, very important. And I don't want to, I could go on, but let me give chance to other people also.
All right, thank you very much. For the next also, just try and keep it brief.
Thank you. My name is Muthure Kathure. I'm a senior fellow with the Tech Global Institute. Amazing panel, and I'll just speak quick comment, very, very linked to what Diana was talking about. First and foremost, I think very unpopular opinion. I think this idea of tech desks or tech reporters might not be the best for me. And the reason is tech intersects with other spaces or other sectors in the society. How about building the capacity of that agriculture reporter or that someone who's writing about business to look at how tech is impacting that sector of the society? The reason I'm saying that is I feel like that aspect of just having a tech reporter or a tech person, actually what it does, it expands the gap between the who knows and who don't knows, and even covering issues as they affect the society. And if you look at the issues that come up, are actually issues that can be covered. For example, a human rights journalist can cover things around data colonization, techno-authoritarianism around DPI. If we continue doing that, we'll see what I saw during the launch of the Kwanza Techno City, talking about very funny things like smart expressway or things like that, which didn't make sense actually to the people. But then looking at actually the impact of Kwanza Techno City on the people would call for the people who's covering the issues in the community. Just one more thing around what Diana was talking about. I think I agree totally when we continue talking about tech reporters, they keep covering the development part of it. Whereas if you look at it, there are three things for me. I think there's the development, we're talking about all these things that are being put in place, the deployment of the same of this technology, and then the governance bit. I think what journalists are being shown or trained or looking at is the development bit only. Talk about the praises of this new model, talk about these technological advancements, but not talk about how it's being deployed and its impact on the society. And then finally look at how is it governed? How is it governed? What are the policies, the regulatory framework? So I think we also need to look at those three things and not just on the development bit of it alone. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Next. Yes, go ahead.
Is it on? Okay. James Omadai, Big. Now, mine is to just echo, Mwalimu Mudhuri here. I don't think we need specialized journalists for DPI because, as he said, if you think about it, you have DPI in health, agriculture, and many education and many other aspects of society. I think what maybe is missing is some form of training to sort of like complete the circle, because I think even right now journalists know what DPI is, but they don't know that word. They don't know digital public infrastructure, but they know e-citizen, they know SHA, they know all that stuff, and they've read. So, for instance, SHA had an issue where they were using a format. They were using, I don't know, some form of OTP. It wasn't working. Journalists wrote about it, but they probably don't know what they're writing about is. It's called DPI. So we need to, whatever that circle, to also include data security, data protection, platform governance, platform accountability. The last thing is we also need to put elements on the owner of the platform, which is in many instances is government. We also need to also put them to task to do public participation and include media. The reason for that is a lot of these platforms, we are not told the what, why, where, and I feel like if government and whoever owners of these platforms can put a bit of resources in that, the public can be able to better understand these platforms, their impact, and maybe have a better say, on either future platforms or existing platforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists. A comment and a quick question. It was good to hear how can we just introduce yourself. Okay, I'm John Okande. I work with UNESCO. So a quick comment and a question. One is I liked the discussions around how do we humanize DPI, and I think we are all cognizant with the fact that within the context where we are in, the only way to get attention is to talk about things that DPI proponents do not want us to talk about. And this would likely link to looking at the right side of rollout, the deployment, development of DPI, among other issues. So this could be that carrot for journalists. Let's say there is a system being rolled out and there's certain things that it sort of foregrounds or would impact by looking at the impact side of it. If it's human rights issues, marginalizing certain voices, or just negating plurality of voices within that ecosystem, that could be a story. And I think that would bring the proponents to the table so that you discuss how best can we do your stories. Instead of just glorifying the process, which most of the time we see that this has been rolled, it will do this, and we heard about the numbers thing. We talk about we've registered 100,000 people, but you'll find less story on the impact side of that. What is the nexus of registration vis-a-vis other elements that sort of inform that particular issue or DPI process, I think. So what that might be an incentive in that you look at what is not being told. For example, Huduma number. You look at what has not been done to align to certain frameworks. And that is what you report on, and you will be able to have a listening because they'll come defending and say, oh, we've done this, we've done this. And that also allows civil society groups and other actors to look at how can we possibly do HRIAs on this, human rights impact assessment of the DPI processes, which is a discussion that has not gotten traction because we only look at develop, deploy, and we are not really think of the impact side of it, and we are seeing it around carbon issues. We're just talking about incentivizing carbon credits, but we are not talking about and what systems are being developed around this. Like now, the data centers that are being built within our country, most people just hear rumors about it, but they don't know the overall economic impact. We're looking at numbers in terms of money, but we're not looking foresight, like what direct impact does it have? For example, our languages, the way we live, the way we access certain resources, among others. So just a few ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's have this two and then Mike goes ahead. Very briefly, so that we can.
Okay, afternoon everyone. Mine is a comment and a question in between. I think when you look at DPI, there's the data sharing aspect, identity, and payments. It's very easy to send payments, very easy to, data sharing, a bit complex, but digital identity, I think that's where there's a lot of issues. I think Diana mentioned Huduma number, and we all remember the saga around it, and most of these things have been extremely politicized. So how do you win public trust when it comes to some of these ideas that are generally good, but the politicization around it makes it, you erode a lot of public trust. Or let me say, a lot of public trust is eroded through the process. So when you introduce something like Maisha number, which generally should be a good thing, then it doesn't really work. I think journalism should be in-depth, should be, just covering an end-to-end, all-round reporting that is precise and in-depth. Imagine, look at eCitizen, or the equivalent of eCitizen, Irembo, in Rwanda, and just what they have been able to achieve. I don't think a journalist's work is to talk about, I'm in tech, but even for me, tech is complicated. I think the impact resonates more with the user. And I think we can't get out of event reporting. Event reporting must be done. In fact, people on Twitter will do it faster than me. But a journalist can come up with a longer documentary, for example. You don't have to talk about tech yourself, but you can talk to Daktari and interview him. Then he'll handle that part of tech really well, fantastic. But I think the role of journalism is to know who are the impact players, who are the power players in this, how do I bring them together? Okay, this event has been mentioned, but how do we create a longer documentary that people now can appreciate and see it end to end?
All right. We'll take this to and we'll come to that. Very quickly, a question to Diana. Diana, there's a question. Yeah, so you raised 3 points: governance, inclusion, and people's rights. And you also brought this issue of South Africa and Chad and the differences. And it got me thinking, do you think DPI suffers a threat from state capture by an authoritarian regimes? And if yes, does that present an opportunity for journalists to almost align the two to figure out what is currently happening, taking place in a particular context? Because I think it might be interesting for the citizens to understand. I think it's DPI, but it's actually leaning towards something else. Last thing, I think you can add the vendor lock-in in that.
Where are the questions?
Thank you. Thanks so much.
We haven't yet. We haven't had any questions.
My name is Ivan Rukanda from Makere, Uganda. And I think any of the three will answer my question, just because you're looking for questions. We have we've emphasized the role of government in DPI. We emphasized the role of newsrooms and the role of the journalists and the communities. But the giants we haven't talked about in all this. We haven't talked about the tech giants, because at the end of the day, governments will adopt the technologies and they will choose how to use them in many cases because they've been influenced by the big tech companies, Meta and others, and how as governments collecting information, as newsrooms and journalists are gathering this information and sharing it, how is Meta and others collecting that information and also using it for their own business ends? So my question is, what is the role of big tech in influencing how DPIs are influencing us as countries? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. As we respond to those comments and questions, also panelists, you can give your last word in terms of if you were to have a magic wand, what would you like to see around media coverage on DPI? That would your number.
Yes, I think Dr. Lukanda's question will go to Diana. I'll leave it for Diana. I'll leave it for her because that's her area. But what I wanted to share about is, it's interesting that we've had a conversation on digital transformation. And somehow all our reference to the journalism products that we could produce are the traditional journalism products. We've talked about documentaries, we've talked about the investigations, the he said, she said stories, and all that. We have not talked about taking advantage of new technology to produce products that actually take this information where the audience is. You have TikTok. TikTok has the highest audience in many African countries, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, name it. but we have not made reference to those platforms. There are platforms which are waiting for journalism to happen to them, but we have left them to people to produce content, which many times is doing more damage than actually being informative. So I think as we think about this, what kind of content can we produce that helps advance the conversation on DPIs, we should be talking about also what kind of new tech platforms or new technologies can we use on the information dissemination side, not just the production side. I think the production side we handle it with OSINT tools and all that, but the broadcasting side we haven't talked about that. So I thought we should talk about that. But it also now offers me a chance to pitch an idea to Dr. Mwesige and Dr. Wakabi that there should be ongoing conversations. We should not wait for traditional stories for this, for information on DPIs to go out there. There should be ongoing conversations through these media platforms. And I think this can be done through, for instance, podcasts. At Menterprise Africa, I've been thinking about how can we, for instance, have podcasts or even webinars that just help people understand